Respect it. Don't let his silence fool you. Just because he stopped calling doesn't mean he stopped caring. Just because his name no longer lights up your phone doesn't mean your memory stopped living inside his mind. Sometimes the loudest thing a person can do is go silent. And sometimes the person who says nothing is fighting the biggest battle within himself. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear may completely change the way you see silence, distance, and the man who walked away. There is something about silence that scares people. When someone stops talking, our minds begin creating stories. We assume they forgot us. We assume they moved on. We assume we meant nothing. And if you've ever loved someone deeply, you know exactly how painful that feeling can be. You wake up wondering if they think about you. You go to sleep wondering if your name still crosses their mind. You see a place you once visited together, and suddenly memories come rushing back like a flood. What cannot stop? Then a question appears. If he cared so much, why is he silent? That question has broken the hearts of countless people. But today, I want to tell you something important. Silence and forgetting are not the same thing. Distance and indifference are not the same thing. And a man who is silent is not always a man who has stopped thinking about you. You see, one of the biggest mistakes people make is believing that everyone processes emotions the same way. Women often heal through expression. They talk, they share, they release, they seek understanding. But many men are different. Many men retreat into themselves. They disappear into work, into routines, into distractions, into solitude. Not because they feel nothing, but because they feel something they don't know how to explain. I learned this lesson from a story that has stayed with me for years. There was a woman named Angela. Angela had been in a relationship for almost 4 years. They talked every day, shared dreams, shared plans, shared a vision of a future together. Then one day everything changed. The relationship ended. No dramatic betrayal, no explosive argument, just distance. Slowly, painfully, like watching a sunset disappear 1 inch at a time. At first, Angela expected him to return. She expected a call, a message, an apology, something, but nothing came. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Silence. Total silence. And that silence began convincing her of something dangerous. It convinced her that she had never mattered. Every day, she repeated the same painful thought. If I meant something to him, he would reach out. The silence became evidence. Evidence that she had been forgotten. Evidence that she was easy to replace. Evidence that she was no longer important. But life has a funny way of revealing truths when you least expect them. Nearly 2 years later, Angela ran into a mutual friend. During the conversation, his name came up. She tried to act unaffected, tried to pretend she had completely moved on. Then the friend said something unexpected. He talks about you sometimes. Angela froze. What? The friend nodded. He still asks how you're doing. Her heart skipped. The friend continued. He keeps a picture of you in an old box. I saw it myself. Angela couldn't believe it. This was the same man who hadn't contacted her in years. The same man whose silence convinced her she was forgotten. The same man she believed had erased her from his life. Yet there she was, still living somewhere inside his memories, still occupying space in his thoughts, still remembered. Now listen carefully. This story is not about getting your ex back. This story is not about waiting for someone to return. This story is about understanding something deeper. People carry memories longer than they admit, especially men. Many men never say what they feel. Many never reveal the emotional battles happening behind closed doors. Society teaches men to suppress, to hide weakness, to avoid vulnerability, to act unaffected. And because of that, many become experts at looking fine while carrying storms inside. You see a quiet man, you assume peace, but silence does not always mean peace. Sometimes silence is confusion. Sometimes silence is regret. Sometimes silence is pride. Sometimes silence is fear. And sometimes silence is a daily struggle between reaching out and staying away. I want you to think about something. Have you ever heard a song that instantly reminded you of someone? Of course you have. One melody, one lyric, and suddenly you're transported years into the past. The smell, the laughter, the conversation, the feeling. Everything comes back. Now ask yourself this. If that happens to you, why wouldn't it happen to him? Why wouldn't a certain restaurant remind him of you? Why wouldn't a certain movie bring back memories? Why wouldn't a random Sunday afternoon trigger thoughts he thought were long buried? Human beings are emotional creatures. We are collections of memories. And no matter how hard someone tries, certain people leave fingerprints on the soul. Those fingerprints don't disappear simply because communication stopped. They remain quietly, invisible, but present. The problem is that many people spend years trying to interpret silence. They become detectives, analyzing every social media post, every online status, every coincidence, searching for proof, searching for answers, searching for signs. But here's what I've learned. The greatest power comes when you stop needing proof, because whether he's thinking about you or not should never determine your worth. Let me say that again. Whether he thinks about you every day or never thinks about you again does not define your value. Your value existed before he entered your life. Your value remains after he leaves. Too many people attach their self-worth to another person's attention. They measure their importance by texts, calls, replies, validation. But real confidence is different. Real confidence says, I know who I am even when nobody is watching. And that changes everything. Because when you stop chasing validation, you start attracting respect. When you stop begging to be remembered, you become unforgettable. When you stop trying to prove your worth becomes obvious. Here's the truth most people never hear. The woman who moves forward is often the woman who stays in a man's mind the longest. Not because she played games, not because she made him jealous, not because she manipulated him, but because she chose herself. She healed, she grew, she evolved, she became someone who no longer needed permission to be happy. And there is something incredibly powerful about a person who continues shining after heartbreak. People remember that. They remember strength. They remember grace. They remember dignity. And most importantly, they remember the person who refused to let pain define their future. So if you're listening right now wondering whether his silence means you've been forgotten, I want you to consider another possibility. Maybe silence is not the story. Maybe your growth is. Maybe the real question isn't whether he's thinking about you. Maybe the real question is whether you're thinking enough about yourself. Because while you're trying to understand what is happening in his mind, life is waiting for you to rediscover what is possible in yours. And that is where our story truly begins. There was a period in Angela's life when every morning felt exactly the same. She would wake up, reach for her phone, and before her feet even touched the floor, her mind would drift back to him. Not because she wanted to suffer, not because she enjoyed reliving the past, but because unanswered questions have a way of becoming permanent guests in the human mind. The hardest pain is not always rejection. Sometimes the hardest pain is uncertainty, not knowing what happened, not knowing what someone feels, not knowing whether they ever truly cared. And when silence replaces answers, the imagination starts creating stories. Stories that often become far more painful than reality. Angela convinced herself that if he missed her, he would call. If he loved her, he would return. If she mattered, he would find a way. But as the months passed, something unexpected happened. She became exhausted. Exhausted from wondering. Exhausted from hoping. Exhausted from living her life through the lens of someone else's choices. One evening she sat alone in her apartment. The room was quiet. No television, no music, no distractions, just her thoughts. And for the first time, she asked herself a question she had been avoiding. What if I'm spending more time thinking about him than I am thinking about my own future? That question hit her hard because the truth was obvious. While she was trying to understand his silence, she had become silent toward herself. She had stopped pursuing goals, stopped trying new things, stopped dreaming, stopped imagining a life that didn't include him. And that's when she made a decision. Not a dramatic decision, not the kind people post online, a private decision, a powerful decision. She decided that whether he returned or not, she would not put her life on hold. Now listen carefully. This is where most people make a mistake. They think moving on means forgetting. It doesn't. Moving on means moving forward. Those are two very different things. You don't erase memories. You don't delete emotions. You don't wake up one morning and magically stop caring. Healing doesn't work like that. Healing is learning how to carry a memory without letting it carry you. And that takes time. Angela started slowly. She joined a class she had always wanted to take. She reconnected with old friends. She traveled to places she once thought she'd only visit with him. At first, everything reminded her of the relationship. Every restaurant, every song, every sunset, every holiday. But gradually something changed. The memories stopped controlling her. They became part of her story instead of the center of it. And that's when life revealed another truth. The more she focused on herself, the less she obsessed over what was happening in his mind. Now here's something fascinating about human nature. When someone knows they still have access to your attention, they often take it for granted. But when that access disappears, awareness begins. Think about it. Have you ever lost something you used every day? Maybe a favorite watch, maybe an old photograph, maybe an object you barely noticed while it was there. The moment it was gone, its value suddenly became clear. People are often the same way. We don't always recognize significance in the moment. Sometimes realization arrives later, much later. And that's why silence can be misleading. Because you have no idea what lessons life may be teaching someone after they leave. You have no idea what comparisons they're making. You have no idea what memories keep resurfacing. You have no idea what regrets they refuse to admit. You only see the silence. You don't see the internal conversation. I once heard a wise man say something powerful. He said, people don't always miss the relationship. Sometimes they miss the way you made them feel. Think about that. Your laugh, your encouragement, your loyalty, your presence during difficult times, your belief in them when nobody else believed. Those things don't disappear easily. Those experiences become part of a person's emotional history. And emotional history has a remarkable memory. That's why years later, a person can suddenly remember someone they haven't spoken to in forever. One conversation, one familiar scent, one old photograph, and suddenly emotions return. Not because they were planning it, not because they expected it, but because memories have their own timing. The mistake many people make is assuming silence means absence of thought. Yet some of the most powerful thoughts happen in silence. A man may never send the message, yet still think about writing it. He may never make the call, yet replay the conversation in his mind 100 times. He may never admit regret, yet carry it quietly for years. Now, does that mean every silent man secretly wants to come back? No, and it's important to be honest about that. Some people do move on. Some relationships truly end. Some chapters close forever. But that's not the point. The point is that silence alone doesn't tell the whole story. You cannot measure someone's thoughts by their words alone. And you certainly cannot measure your worth by their silence. One afternoon, Angela met an elderly woman while sitting in a park. They started talking. The woman had been married for over 40 years. As they shared stories, Angela mentioned her heartbreak. She spoke about the silence, the confusion, the uncertainty, The older woman listened patiently. Then she smiled and said something Angela would never forget. People spend too much time trying to understand who left, and not enough time understanding who stayed. Angela looked confused. The woman pointed gently toward her. You stayed. For a moment, Angela said nothing. The woman continued. After all the disappointment, all the tears, all the sleepless nights, you're still here. You're still breathing. You're still growing. You're still becoming. That simple observation changed everything, because heartbreak has a way of making us focus on absence. Who left? Who disappointed us? Who failed us? Who abandoned us? But strength begins when we recognize what remains. Our character remains. Our potential remains. Our future remains. Our ability to love remains. And most importantly, our relationship with ourselves remains. The older woman smiled one final time before leaving. And as Angela watched her walk away, she realized something profound. She had spent years wondering if he still thought about her. But she had spent very little time appreciating the woman she was becoming. That realization marked the beginning of a new chapter. Not because the memories disappeared, not because the questions vanished, but because her attention finally shifted from the past toward the future. And here's the beautiful irony. The moment people stop chasing answers from others is often the moment they begin finding answers within themselves. The moment they stop seeking validation is often the moment they become truly confident. The moment they stop asking, why wasn't I enough, is often the moment they realize they always were. If you're listening right now, wondering whether his silence hides thoughts he never shares, remember this. Maybe he thinks about you. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he remembers every detail. Maybe he remembers only fragments. But your life is too valuable to be paused while waiting for certainty, because there is a version of you waiting on the other side of this pain, stronger, wiser, more confident, more peaceful. And the journey toward becoming that person is far more important than understanding the silence of someone who chose distance. Yet the story doesn't end there, because life had one more lesson waiting for Angela. A lesson that would completely transform the way she understood love, absence, and the surprising reasons people never truly forget those who changed them. Years passed, not weeks, not months, years. The kind of years that quietly change a person. The kind that teach lessons no book can teach and no speech can fully explain. Angela was no longer the woman who sat awake at night staring at her phone. She was no longer measuring her happiness by someone else's attention. Life had moved forward, and so had she. She had built new friendships, created new memories, discovered strengths she never knew existed. Most importantly, she had learned how to enjoy her own company. Now that may sound simple, but it is one of the hardest lessons in life, because many people spend years searching for someone to complete them, when the truth is that no healthy relationship begins with two halves. It begins with two whole people choosing to walk together. And once Angela understood that, something changed forever. She stopped seeing herself as someone who had been abandoned. She started seeing herself as someone who had survived. There is power in that shift. A powerful difference between asking, why did this happen to me? And asking, what did this teach me? One question creates a victim. The other creates growth. One evening, after a long day, Angela found herself cleaning out old boxes stored in her closet. You know the kind. Boxes filled with pieces of your past, old photographs, letters, movie tickets, tiny reminders of moments you once believed would last forever. As she sorted through them, she found a picture. It was a picture of the two of them, smiling, laughing, happy. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. The memory returned instantly. Not the pain, the memory. And that surprised her, because years earlier, seeing that photograph would have ruined her entire week. Now it simply made her smile, not because she wanted him back, Not because she was secretly waiting, but because she had finally reached a place where she could appreciate the chapter without needing to relive it. And that is real healing. Real healing is not hatred. Real healing is peace. You stop fighting the memory. You stop fighting reality. You stop fighting yourself. You simply accept. Acceptance is powerful because acceptance frees energy. Energy once spent on regret becomes available for growth. Energy once spent on resentment becomes available for joy. Energy once spent on wondering becomes available for living. And that's exactly what happened. A few months later, Angela attended a professional event in another city. She wasn't looking for love. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply living her life. And isn't it amazing how often life surprises us when we're busy focusing on ourselves? During that event, she met someone, not because she chased him, not because she forced it, not because she was desperately trying to replace the past. It happened naturally. Two people, one conversation, then another, then another. What caught her attention wasn't his charm. It wasn't his appearance. It wasn't even the things he said. It was how she felt around him. Peaceful, safe, respected. For the first time in a very long time, she wasn't analyzing every interaction. She wasn't wondering where she stood. She wasn't decoding mixed signals. There was clarity, and clarity is something many people underestimate because confusion has become so common that people mistake it for passion. But real connection doesn't leave you constantly questioning your value. Real connection doesn't require endless guessing. Real connection brings consistency, and consistency creates trust. As their friendship grew, Angela noticed something unexpected. She thought less and less about the past, not because she was trying to forget, but because her life had become fuller. You see, the best way to move beyond a painful chapter isn't to obsess over closing it. It's to start writing a new one. Life naturally creates distance from old wounds when you give yourself permission to keep growing. Now here's where the lesson becomes even deeper. Several months later, Angela received an unexpected message. A message from someone she hadn't heard from in years. Him, the man whose silence once kept her awake. The man she once thought had forgotten her completely. The message was simple, respectful, short, but what mattered wasn't what it said. What mattered was how she felt when she read it. Years earlier, that message would have shaken her world. Years earlier, she would have analyzed every word, every punctuation mark, every possible meaning. But now she simply smiled because she finally understood something important. The closure she had spent years seeking from him had actually come from herself. That realization is life-changing. Many people wait for an apology, a conversation, an explanation, a confession, a grand return. They believe healing lives on the other side of another person's actions. But often healing arrives long before those things ever happen. Healing arrives the moment you stop giving someone else control over your peace. The message reminded Angela of something. People often return in some way, sometimes physically, sometimes emotionally, sometimes only through memory. Not because they always want a second chance, but because human beings rarely forget those who genuinely impacted their lives. The people who helped us grow, the people who challenged us, the people who loved us sincerely, the people who changed us. Those people leave marks. And marks don't disappear simply because time passes. That doesn't mean every story gets a reunion. It doesn't mean every ending becomes a new beginning. It simply means that meaningful connections matter. They leave echoes. Years later, you may not remember every conversation, but you'll remember how someone made you feel. You'll remember kindness. You'll remember respect. You'll remember support during difficult moments. You'll remember the person who believed in you when you struggled to believe in yourself. And if that's true for you, why wouldn't it be true for him? This is why silence can be deceptive. Because silence only tells you what someone is saying. It doesn't tell you what they're remembering. It doesn't tell you what they're feeling. It doesn't tell you what lessons they've learned, and it certainly doesn't tell you your value. One of the greatest mistakes people make is assuming that if someone isn't speaking, nothing is happening. But life teaches us differently. Seeds grow underground long before anyone sees them. Change happens internally long before it becomes visible. Regret develops silently. Wisdom develops silently. Realization develops silently. And often, by the time someone understands your value, you've already learned yours. That is the moment everything changes. Because when you finally understand your own worth, you stop needing someone else's recognition to confirm it. You stop chasing. You stop proving. You stop convincing. You simply become, and there is something incredibly attractive about a person who knows their worth without needing to announce it. A person who walks forward with dignity. A person who chooses growth over bitterness. A person who transforms pain into wisdom. That kind of person is unforgettable. Not because they demanded attention, but because they became impossible to ignore. Angela eventually realized that the question she once obsessed over had never been the right question. The question was never, is he still thinking about me? The better question was, am I becoming the person I was meant to be? Because the answer to that question determines the quality of your future. And as her life continued unfolding, she discovered one final truth about silence, love, and the people who leave footprints on our hearts. A truth that changes everything once you truly understand it. Respect it. If there's one thing I hope you remember after listening to this story, it's this. Do not let someone's silence convince you that you are forgettable. Because the truth is, the people who genuinely touch our lives are rarely forgotten. They may not always say it. They may not always show it. They may not always return. But meaningful connections leave lasting impressions. And that is something time cannot easily erase. Yet here's the lesson that matters most. Whether he still thinks about you is not the thing that will transform your life. Whether he misses you is not the thing that will heal your heart. Whether he remembers every conversation, every laugh, every moment you shared is not what determines your future. What determines your future is what you choose to do with today. Because while you are wondering about his thoughts, your dreams are waiting. Your growth is waiting. Your next chapter is waiting. Your happiness is waiting. Life is waiting. Too many people spend years standing at the door of a chapter that has already ended, when it will reopen. Meanwhile, beautiful opportunities are quietly appearing behind them. Opportunities to grow, to heal, to discover who they truly are, to build a life so meaningful that it no longer depends on anyone else's validation. And when that happens, something remarkable occurs. You stop asking, why did they leave? You start asking, what can I become? You stop focusing on loss. You start focusing on possibility. You stop chasing closure. You become closure. And that's when true freedom begins. Maybe he's thinking about you today. Maybe a memory crossed his mind when he heard a familiar song. Maybe he remembered your smile while driving past a place you once visited together. Maybe he regrets things he never had the courage to say. Maybe he appreciates your value more now than he ever did before. Or maybe life has carried him down a different road entirely. The reality is, you'll never fully know. And that's okay, because peace doesn't come from knowing everything. Peace comes from accepting what you cannot control and focusing on what you can. You can control your attitude. You can control your growth. You can control the way you treat yourself. You can control the standards you set for your future. You can choose to become stronger instead of bitter, wiser instead of wounded, hopeful instead of hopeless. And that choice changes everything. Remember this, the most powerful woman is not the woman who spends her life proving someone wrong. The most powerful woman is the one who spends her life proving herself right. Right about her worth. Right about her strength. Right about her ability to rise after disappointment. Right about her ability to create happiness from within. Because when you truly know your value, silence loses its power over you. You no longer panic when someone pulls away. You no longer question your worth because of another person's choices. You no longer need constant reassurance. You stand firmly in the knowledge that your value was never created by someone's attention and can never be destroyed by their absence. And that confidence becomes your greatest strength. So if you re-listening to me right now and wondering whether his silence means he has forgotten you, I want you to hear this clearly. You were never meant to spend your life waiting for someone to remember your worth. You were meant to recognize it yourself. You were meant to build a life so full, so meaningful, and so rich with purpose that no silence could ever make you doubt who you are. Because the goal is not to stay on someone's mind forever. The goal is to create a life that keeps you excited about your own future. And when you do that, something beautiful happens. You stop looking back with pain. You start looking forward with confidence. You stop living in questions. You start living in possibilities. And whether he thinks about you once a day, once a year, or never again becomes far less important than the fact that you finally learned to think highly of yourself. That's the real victory. That's the real healing. That's the real transformation. So walk forward, hold your head high, protect your peace, know your worth, and never allow another person's silence to make you forget the incredible value that has been inside you all along. Because the right people will recognize it. The wrong people will reveal themselves. And life has a way of rewarding those who keep growing, keep believing, and keep moving forward. Your story is not over. In many ways, it's only just beginning. And the best chapter of your life may still be waiting to be written.